The twin suns of Vera Prime burned above the sprawling alien marketplace where hundreds of species gathered from across the galaxy, and the air was thick with the strange scent of spices, fuel fumes, and desperation. Ethan moved carefully through the crowded alleys, keeping his hood low over his face because humans were rare this far from Earth, and often seen as easy prey in the outer worlds. He had been scavenging broken starship parts for weeks, trying to earn enough credits to repair his small freighter, the Starwind, but fate had other plans for him today. As he walked past glowing stalls filled with bizarre alien tech, he heard distant echoes of voices carried through the thick air, an announcement blasting across the marketplace, calling attention to the grand auction hall, and curiosity pulled him closer until he found himself standing at the edge of a massive gathering chamber filled with alien nobles, merchants, and bounty hunters from 100 systems. In the center stood a raised platform where cages lined with energy bars displayed living beings shackled and silent. Ethan froze for a moment because he knew what this was: an illegal slave auction, banned in most civilized sectors but flourishing here under the rule of the Galactic Syndicate. He wanted to turn back, he really did, but something caught his eye. Inside one of the cages near the end stood a young alien girl, unlike any he had ever seen. Her skin shimmered faintly with silver tones, her long, dark hair framed her delicate features, and her bright violet eyes were filled with something Ethan rarely saw in the outer world's fear, pure and raw. She looked lost and fragile, out of place among the other slaves. And yet there was something strange about her, the way she carried herself, even in chains. There was quiet dignity in her posture, as if she were hiding something far greater than her captors realized. The announcer's booming voice cut through the murmurs of the crowd, declaring that the next item was rare, exotic, and valuable, and Ethan could feel the tension rising around him as alien buyers leaned forward, their reptilian and insectoid features illuminated by flashing lights. The bidding began low but climbed rapidly as merchants fought over her price. Ethan stood frozen, torn between walking away and staying because this was none of his business. But then he saw the look in her eyes when she glanced at him. Just for a second, it was not a look of pleading but of something deeper, a silent call for help. Before he even understood what he was doing, his hand shot up and his voice rang out, cutting through the chaos as he made a bid far beyond what he could afford. The crowd fell silent for a moment, dozens of alien eyes turning toward him with surprise and amusement. A human daring to claim something so valuable was almost unheard of. The announcer grinned, his sharp teeth glinting under the lights as he slammed his staff down, declaring Ethan the winner, because no one dared to challenge a man foolish enough to bid so recklessly. Ethan felt his heart pounding as guards released the energy locks and handed him a small control chip linked to her restraints. She stepped forward, cautiously, her violet eyes fixed on him, but she said nothing, and he did not ask because he could see how terrified she was. He simply turned and led her out of the auction hall, ignoring the murmurs, whispers, and hostile stares that followed them. Outside, the heat of Vera Prime hit them like a wall. The busy streets felt louder, brighter, and more dangerous than ever. Ethan pulled his hood lower and motioned for her to follow as he weaved through alleys and hidden passages until they reached the docking bay, where the Starwind rested, small, battered, but reliable. Once inside the safety of the ship, he finally turned to her and spoke softly, telling her she was free now, that he had no intention of keeping her as a slave. Her lips parted slightly as if she wanted to speak, but she hesitated before shaking her head silently and looking away. He studied her carefully, noticing faint markings along her wrists, symbols etched into her skin glowing faintly in the dim cabin light. They were unlike anything he had seen before, and something about them unsettled him, but he decided not to press her for answers, not yet. Instead, he asked her name, and after a long pause, she whispered softly, "Lyra," her voice trembling like she had not spoken in days. Before Ethan could respond, a sudden warning alarm blared through the ship, his onboard AI detecting several incoming ships locking onto his position. He cursed under his breath, rushing to the cockpit as the system displayed their insignia, the galactic syndicate they had realized what he had done, and they were not about to let him leave so easily. He powered up the Starwind's engines, shouting for Lyra to strap herself in as the small freighter roared to life, lifting off from the docking bay into the dense skies. Above, as they broke through the upper atmosphere, Ethan saw 3 syndicate ships on the scanner closing in fast. He pushed the engines to their limits, weaving through traffic lanes as Lyra clung to the seat beside him, silent, but her wide violet eyes betrayed fear and something else, determination, like she had seen danger far worse than this. Ethan barked at the ship's AI to engage evasive protocols, but the syndicate vessels were faster, heavier, and armed with weapons far beyond anything the Starwind could counter. One lucky shot grazed their hull, sending sparks through the cabin and throwing Ethan against the console. Steadied himself, gritting his teeth as alarm screamed, but Lyra suddenly leaned forward, her hands glowing faintly with light as she touched the navigation panel, and the entire system shifted, responding instantly to her command routes. Recalibrated engines surged forward as if fueled by something far beyond their design, and the ship leapt ahead, leaving the syndicate vessels trailing behind in confusion. Ethan stared at her, shocked, demanding to know how she had done that. Lyra only whispered softly that there was no time to explain. Not yet. Moments later, the Starwind vanished into hyperspace, leaving Vera Prime and the syndicate far behind. Ethan leaned back in his chair, breathing heavily, his mind racing with questions. He glanced at Lyra, seeing her exhausted, trembling slightly but still composed, and he realized this was no ordinary slave. Something about her power, her markings, her presence, it all pointed to a truth he could not yet see. Somewhere in the shadows of Vera Prime, a cloaked figure watched their escape through a secure hologram feed, whispering softly into a communicator. The heir has been found, and as the message traveled across encrypted channels, deep into the Zerenian Empire, powerful forces stirred for the first time in years, preparing to reclaim their lost princess. The hum of hyperspace filled the cabin of the Starwind as the streaks of distant stars stretched endlessly across the viewport, and Ethan sat in the pilot chair, gripping the worn controls, while his thoughts spun faster than the ship itself, because nothing about this day made sense. He had walked into that auction without a plan, and walked out with a girl who clearly was more than what the syndicate claimed she was, and now bounty hunters and mercenaries would be chasing them through every system with orders to bring them back. Dead or alive, Lyra sat quietly in the co-pilot seat, her violet eyes fixed on the swirling lights outside, as if she were watching memories hidden beyond the stars. And Ethan glanced at her again, noticing the faint glow of her markings pulsing softly across her wrists like living symbols. He finally broke the silence, asking her how she had done what she did with the navigation system, because no one, not even the best smugglers, could bend a ship to their will the way she had. She turned her head, slowly meeting his gaze, but said nothing for a long moment, and when she finally spoke, her voice trembled with a weight of secrets. She said she had been taught things from a young age, things forbidden to most, and that those markings were not chains, but symbols of her birth. Ethan leaned back, confused, pressing her for answers, but she shook her head and whispered that she could not explain everything. Not yet. Before Ethan could ask more, the alarm chimed again, pulling his attention to the ship's scanners. Several signatures had appeared at the edge of their path, syndicate scouts trying to cut them off. He cursed under his breath, switching course and diving into a hidden lane through an asteroid belt. But even as the ship rattled under the stress, Lyra remained calm, her eyes closing, as if she could sense the danger ahead. She warned Ethan just in time for him to bank sharply, avoiding a deadly collision with a spinning fragment of rock. Hours later, after they had shaken off their pursuers, Ethan set the ship on autopilot and turned to her with frustration and curiosity, demanding the truth. He told her he had risked everything for her, even his life, and now the syndicate would never stop hunting him, and he deserved to know who or what she really was. Lyra hesitated before rising slowly and standing in the center of the cabin. She lifted her wrists showing him the glowing symbols, and with a voice both proud and sorrowful, she admitted she was not a slave but the missing heir. To the Zerenian throne, Ethan froze, unable to breathe for a moment, because the Zerenians were one of the most powerful empires in the galaxy, and their princes had been missing for years, sparking rumors of assassination, rebellion, or worse if what she said was true then. By claiming her at the auction, he had unknowingly placed himself at the center of a galactic conflict. His voice was sharp as he asked why she had been in chains at all, and Lyra's eyes grew wet with unshed tears as she confessed that she had run away from her people because her father had promised her in marriage to a rival warlord in a desperate attempt to end a long war. She had refused to be used as a tool for peace, so she fled. But the syndicate captured her and put her on the auction block. The words hit Ethan harder than any laser fire, because he could see the pain in her eyes, the way her voice cracked with shame and sorrow. And yet beneath it all was fire, a strength that defied her chains. He told her bluntly that she should have stayed hidden, because now the entire galaxy would be searching for her, and humans would be blamed for stealing her. The war she had tried to stop could begin again, and Earth itself might suffer. Her lips trembled as she whispered that she had not meant to involve him, but fate had bound them together now, and she asked him to trust her just as she had trusted him. Their conversation was cut short when the ship jolted violently, throwing them both forward. Alarms blared as the scanner lit up with dozens of signatures surrounding them. Syndicate ships had found them again, but this time there were too many to fight and too many to outrun. Ethan cursed, grabbing the controls and trying to weave through the ambush, but the enemy ships closed in like a tightening noose, weapons primed and shields blazing. Lyra clutched the seat, her violet eyes glowing brighter than before, as if she was preparing herself for something. Ethan shouted that they would not survive another hit, but Lyra placed a trembling hand on his arm and told him to hold steady. Her markings flared with brilliant light, and suddenly the air around them seemed to vibrate as energy surged through the cabin. The ship's systems roared to life, engines burning hotter than they should, and for a moment it felt like the Starwind was alive, bending space itself as they shot forward, breaking through the blockade like a blade through glass. Ethan struggled to control the vessel as reality twisted around them, but somehow Lyra's energy shielded them, guiding them into the safety of a nearby nebula. When the light faded, Lyra collapsed against the seat, her body shaking with exhaustion. Ethan caught her before she could fall, his heart racing as he realized she had just saved them with powers no ordinary Zerenian should have. He whispered that she was more dangerous than he had imagined and more important than anyone realized, but she only closed her eyes, murmuring that she was tired and needed rest. He carried her to the small bunk room, covering her with a thin blanket, and for the first time since the auction he allowed himself to breathe, though uneasily, because he knew their journey had only begun. Later, as Ethan sat alone in the cockpit staring at the nebula outside, he replayed the Syndicate's relentless pursuit in his mind. He realized they would never stop, not until they had her back, and the bounty on his head would grow until every hunter in the galaxy sought his capture. He rubbed his face with weary hands, wondering how a simple scavenger like him had been dragged into a war of empires and bloodlines. He thought of leaving her on the next safe planet, but deep inside, he knew he could not abandon her, because something about Lyra had already taken hold of him, something beyond fear, beyond duty. Far across the galaxy, within the shimmering halls of the Zerenian palace, the Emperor received a secret message delivered by a cloaked messenger, who knelt at his throne, whispering, "The heir has been found." The Emperor's cold eyes blazed with both fury and hope, for the return of his daughter would change everything, but her absence had already drawn the Empire to the brink of war. Now her sudden appearance in the company of a human could ignite the galaxy in flames. And so, as Ethan guided the Starwind deeper into the nebula, unaware of the storm gathering ahead, a silent truth settled over them both, that their fates were now bound together, and the galaxy itself would soon decide whether the bond between a human and a runaway princess would bring Salvation or destruction. The soft glow of the nebula surrounded the Starwind, like a living veil hiding them for now from the eyes of the Syndicate. But Ethan knew deep inside that this fragile peace would not last long, because the bounty hunters and mercenaries of the galaxy would never give up on finding Lyra and dragging her back in chains. Or worse, he sat in the cockpit staring at the scanner while his hands gripped the controls, tightly, his mind caught between fear and determination. Because he had never imagined his life would turn this way, a simple scavenger who wanted nothing more than a repaired ship and a quiet life, now becoming the guardian of someone who could decide the fate of entire worlds. Lyra slowly entered the cockpit, her steps unsteady but her gaze calm and distant. She lowered herself into the co-pilot seat without a word, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke, the hum of the engines filling the silence, until Ethan finally asked her if she was all right. She gave a faint nod, saying softly that she had recovered a little, but using her power had drained more energy than she expected. She admitted she could not keep doing it, or it would destroy her. Ethan frowned as worry tightened his chest, and he told her they would have to find a safe place to hide and figure out what to do next. But Lyra shook her head, saying softly that there was no safe place anymore, not for her, not for him, not for anyone. Before Ethan could ask what she meant, the ship's AI interrupted with a sharp alarm. Multiple incoming contacts on long-range scanners, signatures identified as Syndicate warships heading straight toward the nebula. Ethan cursed under his breath, knowing they must have tracked them. Somehow he immediately powered up the engines, but Lyra stopped him, placing a hand on his arm, and whispered that rushing blindly would only lead them straight into a trap. She closed her eyes, focusing for a moment, then pointed to a narrow, uncharted route hidden deep within the nebula, a path so tight and unstable no sane pilot would ever dare take it. But Ethan understood her meaning. They had no choice. He pushed the Starwind into the twisting passage of the nebula, and the ship rattled violently as clouds of ionized gas sparked around them, the hull groaning with every sharp turn. Ethan fought the controls while Lyra guided him calmly, sensing gravitational shifts and energy fields, as if she could feel the path through instinct alone. Behind them, Syndicate ships followed relentlessly, firing bursts of plasma that lit the nebula like violent storms. The explosions shook the Starwind, but Ethan refused to slow down, weaving through deadly tunnels of gas and stone. Then, without warning, massive asteroid field appeared ahead, blocking the route. Ethan clenched his teeth, bracing for impact, but Lyra touched the controls, her markings glowing faintly, and somehow the ship responded faster than physics should allow, slipping between the smallest gaps with impossible precision as debris thundered around them. One Syndicate ship failed to follow and crashed into a spinning fragment, erupting in a silent burst of light, but more vessels pressed on, determined to capture them. Finally, after what felt like endless minutes, they broke free of the nebula into open space. Ethan's relief lasted only seconds, because waiting for them were two colossal Syndicate cruisers bristling with weapons already charging their cannons. Ethan tried to change course, but a voice crackled across the comms, filled with cold menace, demanding he surrender the girl or be destroyed. Lyra's violet eyes locked on Ethan's face, her expression calm yet resolute. She whispered that if they captured her, they would start a war, blaming humans for stealing the air, and millions would die. Ethan tightened his grip on the controls, refusing to give her up, telling her that they would fight if they had to. Before the cruisers could fire, an unexpected signal flooded the comms, an encrypted Zerenian frequency demanding the Syndicate withdraw immediately. The voice carried authority and command, and even Ethan could tell it belonged to someone high in the Zerenian hierarchy. The Syndicate ignored the warning, preparing to attack anyway. But then a shadow fell across the stars as an enormous Zerenian royal dreadnought decloaked, its size dwarfing every ship in the sector, and its weapons primed for annihilation. For a brief moment, the Syndicate hesitated, knowing they were outmatched, but then their leader spoke through the channel, declaring that the girl would never return to her throne alive. Syndicate opened fire, unleashing a storm of plasma across the void, and the Zerenian dreadnought responded with a devastating energy wave, shaking the entire system. Ethan struggled to keep the Starwind away from the crossfire, while Lyra gripped the console, her breathing heavy as she tried to maintain control of her powers. The battle raged violently, ships exploding one after another until finally the Syndicate retreated, leaving wreckage scattered like burning stars in their wake. When silence returned, Ethan exhaled shakily, his hands trembling. But before he could even process what happened, a transmission from the Zerenian dreadnought came through the speaker, a stern female voice introducing herself as Admiral Callis and demanding that Lyra surrender herself immediately. Lyra hesitated, her expression torn between fear and duty. She whispered to Ethan that if she returned now, she would be forced into the marriage she had run from, and war might still come. Ethan clenched his fists, telling her that he would not let anyone decide her fate for her. But Lyra shook her head softly, saying some choices cannot be escaped. Before Ethan could answer, the AI alerted them that Syndicate reinforcements were already inbound too. Many for even the Zerenian fleet to handle. The Admiral ordered Ethan to follow them into hyperspace. But Lyra stopped him again, whispering that something was wrong. She sensed a trap hidden behind the Zerenian orders. Ethan hesitated, but trusted her instinct, deciding to veer off into an uncharted sector instead. As they jumped into hyperspace, alarms still blaring, Lyra finally turned to Ethan, her voice quiet but filled with unspoken fear, saying softly that everything was happening faster than she had expected, and that something much darker than the Syndicate was hunting her. Across the galaxy, in the Syndicate's hidden fortress, a towering figure stood before a massive holographic map, the leader of the Syndicate, his face hidden beneath a dark mask, watching the movements of fleets and whispering to his commanders to spread the bounty wider and offer more credits than ever. Before he declared that the human would not escape with the princess, and that the Zerenian Empire itself would fall when the truth was revealed. For the missing heir was not just royalty, she was the key to unlocking an ancient weapon that could burn entire worlds. Back aboard the Starwind, Ethan stared into the endless streaks of hyperspace, his mind racing as Lyra sat silently beside him, her violet eyes distant, lost in thoughts she did not dare share with him. Yet he knew without asking that their fight had only just begun, and somewhere deep inside he understood that protecting her was no longer just about survival. It was about something greater, something that could decide the future of humanity, Zerenia, and the galaxy itself. The endless streaks of hyperspace faded into a field of distant stars as the Starwind dropped back into normal space, and Ethan leaned forward in his pilot seat, scanning the horizon for any sign of Syndicate forces. But for now there was only silence. The quiet stretched between him and Lyra, yet neither spoke, because both of them were lost in thought. Ethan's mind kept replaying the battle they had just escaped, and the terrifying size of the Zerenian dreadnought, and the way Syndicate forces had fought so ruthlessly, as if they were not after her alone, but after something far bigger. Lyra sat quietly in the co-pilot seat, her violet eyes distant, her fingers brushing unconsciously over the glowing markings on her wrists. Ethan watched her for a moment, then asked softly why the Syndicate wanted her so badly, if it was only about the throne she could have returned to Zerenia long ago and ended this. But Lyra shook her head, slowly, her voice trembling as she whispered that there were secrets buried deep within her bloodline, secrets even she did not fully understand. She said there was an ancient artifact hidden somewhere in the Zerenian archives, a relic of unimaginable power, one her ancestors had sworn to protect, and the Syndicate had discovered that she was the only living key to unlocking it. That felt his chest tighten as the weight of her words settled over him. He realized this was not about politics or ransom or even war. This was about power, the kind of power that could destroy worlds or enslave entire civilizations. And suddenly everything made sense. The relentless chases, the fleets, the bounties, the traps. She was not just a princess. She was the living key to an ancient weapon older than the Zeredian Empire itself. Before Ethan could respond, the ship's eye blared a warning, multiple jump signatures detected nearby. Syndicate ships were on the hunt again, closing fast. He swore under his breath, powering up the engines. But Lyra placed a hand on his arm and told him there was no point in running forever. She said they needed to stop hiding and find the truth before the Syndicate did. Ethan hesitated, but finally nodded because deep down, he knew she was right. They could not keep running blindly through the stars. They needed answers, and they needed them now. Lyra gave him coordinates to an abandoned Zerenian research station hidden deep within a forbidden sector, a place even Syndicate maps refused to mark. She said it was where her ancestors once studied the artifact, and where they might find a way to stop it from falling into the wrong hands. Ethan set the course, and the Starwind jumped again, disappearing into the dark. When they arrived, the station floated in silence above a dying red star, its metal hull scarred by time and drifting debris. The place looked dead, lifeless. But as they docked and stepped inside, Ethan realized that the station still hummed faintly with power, its cold corridors illuminated by flickering blue lights, dust floating in the stale air. The deeper they went, the stranger it became. Walls lined with alien symbols, ancient technology humming faintly, as if holding secrets too dangerous to reveal. They finally reached a sealed chamber at the heart of the station. Lyra approached it, hesitating for a moment before touching the panel. Her markings glowed brighter, responding to something unseen, and with a deep hiss the door slid open, revealing a massive circular room filled with holographic projectors and crystalline consoles, and in the center stood a pedestal holding a fragment of black stone etched with runes that pulsed faintly with energy. Lyra whispered that this was a shard of the ancient weapon, and that only her blood could activate it. Ethan stepped closer, but before he could speak, alarms screamed across the chamber. The station had been breached. The Syndicate had found them again, heavily armed mercenaries storming the corridors, their footsteps echoing through the halls. Ethan grabbed Lyra's hand, pulling her behind a console as blaster fire tore through the room. He returned fire with his old plasma rifle, but they were badly outnumbered. One mercenary lunged forward, striking him hard across the chest, knocking him down. But before the Tila man could finish him, Lyra raised her hand, her markings blazing with blinding light, and a pulse of pure energy erupted from her body, sending the attackers crashing into the walls. Unconscious, breathing heavily, she staggered, collapsing against Ethan, who caught her before she fell. He realized she was burning herself out every time she used that power, and he knew she could not keep this up much longer. He pulled her to her feet, and together they fled deeper into the station, hoping to find another way out. But they were cornered again, this time by the Syndicate leader himself, a towering figure clad in dark armor, his masked face cold and unreadable. He raised his weapon, aiming at Lyra, and his voice rumbled low and cruel as he told Ethan to step aside. Ethan refused, planting himself between Lyra and the leader. He said if they wanted her, they would have to kill him first. The masked man laughed, a sound without warmth, and said Ethan was a fool because he did not understand what she really was. He revealed that the Zerenian throne had hidden the truth for generations, that the princess was not born, she was created, the last living key to an ancient technology capable of rewriting the laws of physics itself. Ethan felt his stomach twist as the words sank in, and Lyra stared at the masked man in horror, whispering that it was a lie, but deep inside part of her feared it was true. Before the Syndicate leader could fire, the entire station shook violently as Zerenian warships dropped out of hyperspace, their weapons lighting up the darkness in a storm of plasma. The Syndicate forces scattered, and the leader cursed, retreating through a side passage, leaving Ethan and Lyra behind. Ethan pulled her toward the docking bay as explosions ripped through the walls, alarms blaring around them. They sprinted through fire and smoke, reaching the Starwind. Just as the station began to collapse, they launched into space, barely escaping as the abandoned station was consumed by a chain of detonations. Fragments of metal spinning across the void. Lyra stared silently out the viewport, her hands trembling. Ethan glanced at her, seeing fear and guilt written across her face. He told her it was not her fault, but she whispered softly that this was only the beginning. She said the Syndicate would never stop until they had the artifact, and that the Zerenian Council would come for her, too, forcing her into chains of duty she did not want. Ethan clenched his fists, telling her they would fight together, no matter who came after them. Far behind them, aboard his flagship, the Syndicate leader watched the destruction of the station through a projection, his masked face unreadable. He ordered his fleet to prepare for war, declaring that if they could not capture the heir alive, they would burn entire systems to the ground until the galaxy surrendered. Ethan knew none of this yet, but as he stared at the endless stretch of stars ahead, he felt the weight of what lay before them. He thought about Earth, about Zerenia, about the Syndicate, and the weapon, and he realized that everything was spiraling towards something massive, something inevitable. Lyra sat beside him, silent, her violet eyes glowing faintly with the power inside her, and neither spoke, because both understood that the choices they made next would decide the fate of more than just themselves. The silence inside the Starwind was heavy, as heavy as Ethan stared at the endless stars passing by, and his mind kept turning with the weight of everything they had learned and everything they had survived. He thought about the Syndicate, about the Zerenian throne, and about the weapon that Lyra alone could unlock, and every instinct told him the galaxy was standing on the edge of something dangerous, something that could burn entire civilizations to ashes if it fell into the wrong hands. Lyra sat beside him in silence, her violet eyes glowing faintly under the soft lights of the cabin, and her fingers rested on the armrest as if trying to calm the storm inside her, but her face showed the weight of a destiny she had tried to escape and failed. Ethan finally broke the silence, saying softly that running was no longer enough. The Syndicate would never stop, and the Zerenian Council would eventually come for her, and unless they acted first, millions of lives would be caught in the fire. Lyra turned her head slowly, meeting his eyes, and nodded with quiet determination, saying that there was only one path left. She had to return to her people and take the throne before someone else used her name and her power to start a war. She said she had run for too long, and that the time for hiding was over. Ethan hesitated, because he knew the moment she stepped back into Zerenian space, everything would change forever. He also knew there was no other choice, and so without another word, he set the course for Zerenia's journey was long and tense, every hour filled with scanning for Syndicate ships and monitoring encrypted channels as news of growing unrest spread across the galaxy. Whispers of rebellion rippled through distant systems, and reports of Syndicate attacks grew worse with each passing day. When they finally dropped out of hyperspace near the Zerenian homeworld, Ethan felt his breath catch in his chest. The planet floated below them like a jewel of silver and blue, wrapped in shimmering defense grids and surrounded by massive fleets, their weapons primed and ready for war. The Starwind was immediately locked onto by dozens of targeting systems. But before a single shot was fired, Lyra sent out a high-level Zerenian command code, one that only the royal bloodline could use for a tense moment. Nothing happened. Then a deep voice responded through the comms, authorizing them to approach, but demanding an escort, and moments later, 2 royal destroyers flanked them, guiding them through the shimmering gates and into the heart of Zerenian space. They landed inside a vast docking bay, filled with armored guards who moved with military precision. Weapons raised but not fired. Lyra stepped forward slowly, her wrists glowing faintly as the markings identified her, and a collective murmur rose among the guards. One by one, they lowered their weapons and knelt before her. Ethan watched in silence as Lyra walked ahead, her back straight, her expression calm, but he could see the storm of emotions inside her. This was the home she had run from, yet the place she now had to face inside. The grand palace halls, towering crystal spires rose around them, while holographic banners rippled across the ceilings. Lyra was brought before the Zerenian High Council, seated upon a dais of silver light. their expressions a mixture of relief, anger, and suspicion. The Emperor, her father, sat at the center, his face carved with years of rule, his voice deep and commanding, as he demanded to know why she had run, and why she had returned with a human. Ethan stood beside her silent, as Lyra stepped forward and spoke her truth. She said she would not be a bargaining piece in someone else's war, and that the Zerenian people deserved a ruler who would fight for their freedom, not trade it away. The council erupted in protest, their voices rising like thunder, but the Emperor raised a hand silencing them before speaking again, his tone heavy with both pride and sorrow. He said that her refusal had cost them alliances and stability, and that returning now would mean she had to lead and bear the weight of the entire empire. Lyra raised her chin and said she would accept that burden, but only on her own terms. She would not marry the warlord, she would not bow to fear, and she would not allow the syndicate to destroy innocent worlds, to seize the artifact. The council fell silent as her words echoed through the chamber. Before they could respond, a sudden alarm blared across the palace. Syndicate forces had launched a massive strike fleet directly into Zerenian space, their flagship, the Obsidian Spear, leading the charge. Ethan and Lyra rushed back to the Starwind as Zerenian warships scrambled to meet the assault. The battle unfolded across the void in a storm of plasma and fire. Ethan pushed the Starwind into the thick of it, weaving between colossal dreadnoughts and deadly beams. Lyra sat beside him, her markings glowing brighter than ever, as she reached deep within herself, unlocking every ounce of power she carried. The Syndicate's leader appeared on the comms, his masked face looming across the screen, his voice sharp and cold, declaring that Lyra would come with him willingly, or he would burn Zerenia to the ground. Ethan snarled in defiance, cutting the transmission and pushing the Starwind straight toward the Obsidian Spear, dodging relentless fire as Lyra prepared to face the man who had hunted her across the galaxy. When they reached the flagship, Lyra closed her eyes and activated the ancient command buried within her blood. Her markings burned with blinding light, and the shard they carried from the research station resonated violently, responding to her power. A surge of raw energy tore through space itself, disabling Syndicate weapons and shields in an instant. The Obsidian Spear trembled under the force, and its systems collapsed. The Syndicate leader screamed in fury before ordering a retreat, his forces scattering into hyperspace, leaving wreckage and silence behind for the first time in weeks. The stars were still back on Zerenia. The people celebrated their unexpected victory while the High Council gathered once more to make a choice. They offered Lyra the throne, formally declaring her. The council gathered once more to make a choice. They offered Lyra the throne, formally declaring her the throne, formally declaring her Empress of Zerenia. She accepted, but not as a ruler who would hide behind politics and tradition. She vowed to unite the Zerenian people and humanity, forging a treaty of peace and protection between their worlds. She promised that no one would ever again use her as a weapon, and that the ancient artifact would remain sealed, forever guarded by those she trusted most. Ethan stood at her side through the ceremonies, but when it was over and the galaxy began to heal, he made his choice. He refused titles and wealth and instead chose freedom. Returning to the stars aboard the Starwind, Lyra met him at the docking bay before his departure and placed a small crystal insignia in his hand. The mark of the royal house. She told him softly that wherever he went in the galaxy, he would never walk alone again. Ethan smiled faintly, promising that if she ever needed him, he would come without hesitation. The Starwind lifted into the skies, leaving Zerenia behind. Ethan looked out at the endless ocean of stars ahead, and for the first time since this began, he felt hope. But deep within the shadows of the galaxy, whispers, carried on encrypted channels, spoke of a darker force watching from afar, something older and far more dangerous than the Syndicate, something that had been waiting for the key to awaken. And though the war was over for now, Ethan knew deep inside that this was only the beginning of a much greater story. The end.